So that fuel price hike kicked in at midnight, adding even more pressure on homes across the country. Cosatu wants the government to take action on these hikes. And I'm joined now by Tony Ehrenreich, who, of course, is Cosatu's Deputy Parliamentary Officer. Tony, thank you so much for joining us. You know, there was a lot of talk last year about interventions on the fuel price. We saw government creating that cushion for a couple of months, and also saying that there were ongoing discussions about stripping some of those taxes out of the fuel price. What actually has happened since then?
Well, you're absolutely right. The first point I think that needs to be made is that the rise in fuel prices are having a devastating effect on the poor, most importantly, because the amounts raised with paraffin was the highest. But these are having inflationary pressures on poorer households and is really debilitating. We do demand that government intervenes urgently to address this, and they can do that. They've done that with a cushion last year around the fuel prices. Remember that 32% of the fuel price is taxes. So there is room to cut those taxes, and there could be other forms of recouping that sources of income for the fiscus. But you can't have the price of fuel rising disproportionately and the effects on every commodity that people buy in the economy, food prices, transport prices, all of the costs are affected with a rise in fuel price. We believe that government does not have enough of a commitment and political will to address this matter with the urgency. There's a report that was commissioned in 2019 by Jeff Radebe that has not yet been tabled, but that those kind of sharing of information that must take place immediately. But we think most urgently there can be a reduction in the amount of taxes that are charged on fuel that will bring down the cost of fuel, and the knock-on effect of rising fuel prices on all other costs will then be mitigated.
You know, I don't think anyone's going to disagree with you, because the pinch is real, but you say that there are other ways that government could recoup the loss of taxes. But how could they do that without it impacting in some other way on the consumer?
Well, the first thing that we've got to take into account, we think, and looking at where are the greatest inflationary pressures coming from and cost pressures for poor people, but for the economy as a whole, is that we've got to take that increases out of the fuel price, because the knock-on effect across the economy is too great. Now, of course, there's going to be some loss to the fiscus, and they've got to look at addressing that. There's a number of ways of doing that. We've got to urgently cut down on corruption, maladministration, malexpenditure, and then there's space for us to tax the extreme wealth in the country a bit more that could make up that shortfall. But I think the most urgent thing that must be done, the most pressing thing to keep our country together, is to make sure the effects of rising fuel prices are reduced, and that there's more affordable fuel, more affordable public transport, and that people are just able to make ends meet in this difficult economic times where we've seen ongoing recessions in South Africa and global recessions predicted in the world economy.
And of course, many homes and businesses are also using fuel, diesel and petrol, for generators because of our extreme load shedding. We know that the ANC at their Lekgotla is now in broad support of declaring a state of disaster. Cosatu, as an alliance partner, was also part of that meeting. Do you believe that this is the way to go?
Certainly. What we believe and what we appreciate is that the proposal initially floated by Cosatu about a declaration of a state of disaster, but our intention for declaring that state of disaster was to make sure that government has both the tools at their disposal to react more urgently to the challenges related to the questions of energy, and then to make sure that we're able to respond to many of the challenges associated with that. So the state of disaster will help government to respond to that, but it also focuses the attention of government and ensures that society as a whole know that there's much more dedicated plans put in place. But there are many areas that needs to be addressed. There's many instances of corruption. Some of those want to tie up the government in endless court cases. A state of disaster would help the government to be able to move against the scalums, make sure we deal with them, that there's due process, and that they get into jail for that corrupt activities. But the state of disaster just gives us all kinds of abilities to respond more urgently to the crisis and ensure that the load shedding that's tearing apart the economy and damaging many households, again more especially the poor, and that is addressed as a matter of urgency. And if we apply our minds and focus, we can certainly have better responses in the short term.
Tony, I've got to ask you about this proposed deal between SA Tourism and the English Premier League football club Tottenham Hotspur. Nearly 900 million rand, nearly £1 billion rather, it will cost for that sort of promotional deal to raise our brand, to raise awareness for tourism. Given what we're facing at home, given the many, many challenges, do you think that that deal is a good idea?
Well, the first point to make, I suppose, is that we've got to appreciate that exports make up 20% of the gross domestic product of the South African economy. So promoting ourselves externally is important. But this deal with Tottenham Hotspurs, with a soccer club, is ridiculous. We think that the minister, when she first became aware of that, she would put a clamp on that immediately and shut it down. We can't have money being wasted in this frivolous way. We've got to make sure that all the resources that we have in South Africa at the disposal of the state, that's used to respond to our most urgent crisis. The crisis that's uppermost is the energy crisis, the electricity crisis, and then the deep levels of poverty, which lets our people live in destitution and desperation. That must be where our relief must be most urgently applied. The minister must immediately stop that and disassociate herself from that. Given the fact that she had not done that at the outset, we have some reservations, but let's fix that now and let's make sure the money is applied to the areas most urgently required.
Thank you so much for chatting to us this evening, Tony Ehrenreich, Cosatu Deputy Parliamentary Officer.